Okay. So Lisa's iPhone, is that Gershon Farber? Not sure who that is. Oh, okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay,
Good morning. Good morning.
Okay. So the one last thing I just wanted to see from the Likutim before we go on to the next sif is that we learned before that a person is not allowed to put themselves into a situation of risk. Now, risk is very relative. I mean, anytime you get into a car, you're putting yourself in a situation of risk. So I would say that there's a couple of things that we have to qualify. Number one, risk means gratuitous risk, unnecessary risk. And also, what is considered risk is something that the general population would not subject themselves to. So, the examples that are given by the Gemara are walking into on a rickety bridge or a dilapidated building, a condemned building. That, the sign says, "Do not enter." Right, the bridge is out, or the building is condemned. Entry is prohibited, right? What about going on vacation and going parasailing or something like that, or scuba diving or skydiving for that matter? Are these things halachically permissible? It seems like whatever society accepts as acceptable risk is considered to be acceptable risk. That's
you ask both greedy parents,
yeah, right. Right. Well, I in that kind of situation, right? So the question is it considered well? There is a purpose because recreation does have its own purpose. I suppose we could make that argument. It really is one of those gray areas that I don't think that we can halachically say absolutely it's forbidden, but I also feel that a person should take a lot of this and should take into consideration the fact, is what are the risks involved? What are the chances that person, if you're going with an instructor and what they do today is they tie you up with the instructor. You're latched on to the instructor. So there's no, I'm talking about skydiving also. So it would seem to me that the risk is minimal, and you have an opportunity to experience something that's very recreational, enjoyable, and things like that. So it would seem that you could justify it, but you have to know what you're doing, and you have to take the proper precautions, and you have to make sure you're healthy enough, right? I'm not sure everyone in this room would necessarily, we would advise you to go skydiving. But then again, George Bush the first of blessed memory, I think he went skydiving when he was in his 80s. He jumped out of a plane. So was he 90 already? So the doctor signed the form.
For people with high blood pressure and it's not well controlled, you don't want to skydiving and you don't want to scuba diving. There are mediums that create increased blood pressure.
Right. And that's the risk of stroke, I guess, right? Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Well, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has this fascinating line at the end of the Kuzari. He was asked, because in the way that the story is narrated in the Kuzari, the rabbi that is living with the Khazar king basically says, "I've decided I need to make Aliyah. It's time for me to go." And the king says, "Why do you need to go? I want you to stay here. You've been teaching me so much Torah. You're vital, to my kingdom." And he says, "Listen, this is, it's where I belong, and I've been talking about it all the time. And then the Khazar king says to him, but what about the terrible risk? Don't you realize that there's a risk involved in traveling through the desert and by sea from the Khazar area, which is, southwest Russia, all the way to the Middle East? He says, there are times in your life when you've accomplished all that you wish to accomplish, and you really feel that in order to reach that next level of living, you need to do certain things that involve risk. And those risks are justifiable. He said, that's what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says. Now, I don't believe he's speaking halachically in that work, at that particular moment. But there is a certain halachic ramification to what he's saying. A person can reach a certain age in their life, and they can say, listen, I'm very comfortable, I'm very secure and safe where I am at this particular moment, but I've done it all already. What's the next chapter? What's the next experience? What's the next conquest? I think all of us at certain points in our lives, especially looking at some of the ages of the people in this room, including myself, we sometimes have to say to ourselves, like, okay, so can I justify certain risks in order to go to the next level of living? That's right. That's another way of putting it. Is it correct? Okay. And I guess it's somewhat related to the thing that he has here in the Likutim on this page that we're going to see. He cites as follows: Isa b'Yerushalmi, Tzarech Adam lahachnis atzmo besofik sakana, kedei lahatzil chavero mevadai sakan. The Talmud Yerushalmi states that if you see someone whose life is in certain danger, you're obligated to put yourself in a potential risk. In other words, if someone is about to die, if you don't intervene, but your intervention could be itself a risk. It's not as risky as theirs, but it's only a suffix, then you're obligated to put yourself at that risk. So you see, for example, a person drowning, and the person can't swim, but you know that by jumping in the water, and you're a good swimmer, but there's a slight chance that you could be pulled out or pulled under or whatever. Well, it depends on the scenario. Got it. Okay.
So most people don't know those techniques. That's why I'm saying it's a sakana for the person if they're just a lamala who doesn't know. Or
okay, right. If you don't know, you have to know what you're doing. But there's still a suffix sakana. So the Yerushalmi says that you're obligated, halachically obligated, to put yourself in a small amount of, in other words, suffix sakana, in order to save someone who's vadai sakana, that if nothing is done, they will perish. We talked a little bit about it in Siman Tes. Siman Tes, we did talk a little bit about it. Right. So, Ulam Harifa Harambam B'Shulchan Aruch Ishmitu Dinzeh. But he says, but none of the big Rishonim, poskim, bring this halacha down from the Yerushalmi. Uchenira mishum dahabavli poligal ha-Yerushalmi. And it's because it seems that the Talmud Bavli disagrees with the Talmud Yerushalmi on that very matter. It's a machlokus between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. Usfeika didei adif mivadai dechavre. And as we learned in Siman Tes, that your suffix takes priority to his vadai. In other words, even if you know that if you do nothing, he's going to perish, you're not obligated to put yourself in a situation of risk in order to save his life. Okay? Ulam tzarach lishkol ha'inyan heitev im yesh bo suffix sakana v'lo ledakdek yoter. And he says, I refer you back to Siman Tes where we talked about this a little bit before, Moshe remembers, but you have to weigh the situation carefully to verify whether there really is a suffix sakana. Now, where does this have ramifications in everyday living? That's not everyday living, but you're right. If you're in the army, right? But you have to follow the protocols of the army. The army may tell you when you're part of this unit, you have to put yourself in suffix sakana in order to save a soldier. What I was thinking about is kidney donation. Okay, there's a guy, and we also talked about, is there a difference between whether you're the only person who can save them or whether there's the group, the community can save them? What is your level of obligation? All of these are gray. All of these are gray situations. But let's say you're approached and you're a good donor match for a kidney donation for this person. But there is a certain amount of risk involved. It may not be a huge amount of risk, but there's a certain amount of risk involved in donating a kidney. The procedure itself could create complications. Plus, I don't know whether there's enough documented studies about the long-term effects of only having one kidney versus having two kidneys as far as the longevity or quality of life 50 years after the donation is done. Do we have those studies, Joey?
So that we actually use a kidney. But if you only have one kidney.
One second, you just made a theological statement. That wasn't a medical statement. That was a theological statement. No, not necessarily. You said God created us with two kidneys so that we could function with only one. Is that really so? Do we know that with certainty? I mean, God didn't create me with two hearts. Okay.
Much faster than if they have two kidneys working all the time.
Okay.
Because renal function is looking at the whole body, and the whole body is taken care of by two kidneys. Everything's cleared by two kidneys. If you take away one of them, very often that kidney, that solo kidney, takes the burden of the whole body. It will decrease its function faster. So you are risking yourself potentially faster overall with one kidney than two. Also, if something happens to that one kidney, then you're also stuck, right? In terms of, if you have a kidney stone in that one kidney that blocks it up, and then you have decreased function in that one kidney, then you're at higher risk. But at the time that you're going through this whole assessment to give over a kidney, and you're, say, younger, or maybe not so younger, but the assessment at the time is excellent. You don't know the future, so you're taking that risk.
So a patient of yours comes to you and says, "I have an opportunity to donate a kidney." So you, as a physician, would want to discuss all of those issues with them, give them the information, and then, but ultimately the decision has to be theirs, right?
Yeah. So in big centers like Toronto,
Yeah.
where you have excellent screening for transplant patients, every transplant that occurs, they go through this rigorous, physical and psychological screening before they do anything. And people have to give consent ultimately, but they know about the risks that are available.
Okay, so this is a situation that I was thinking of. This is suffix sakana, to save someone who's in vadai sakana, because we know there's a guy, let's say, in the community who's going through renal failure and they need a kidney donation. So am I obligated, let's say I'm a match, am I obligated to donate my kidney? The Yerushalmi would say yes, I think, and the Bavli would say no. And halachically, we paskin that you're not obligated, but obviously it's considered to be a virtuous act. Someone who does that, does take the risk, is heroic, but the question is, are they heroic, let's say, if they're a 34-year-old father of 8 kids and the wife is sick and the family relies on him 100% for parnasa, yada, 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 right? In other words, there's obviously got to be a lot of calculus that's put into this. Okay, all right. Okay, let us go on to the next sif. Okay, Zion. Lo yitain tavshil o sha'ar ochlin umashkins, page Reish Tesvav. Lo yitain tavshil o sha'ar ochel umashkin tachas hamita. A person should not place cooked food or any other food or drink underneath their bed. You ever hear this before? Okay. Mipnei sheruach ra'ah. This is a Gemara in Psachim. Mipnei sheruach ra'ah shora aleihem. Because an evil spirit dwells on the underneath your bed where you're sleeping. That's where kids always get spooked by things underneath their bed. Well, it's from the ancient world that there's an evil spirit that dwells underneath your bed. Okay. And therefore, if you leave food underneath it, that spirit will permeate the food. And when you ingest it, it's going to be on some level unhealthy for you, spiritually unhealthy, it would seem. Afilu mechupim b'chli barzel. And that's true even if the food is covered with a metal container. In other words, even if it's like in a chest or something like that, it seems like, well, we'll have to see, we'll have to qualify it. We'll see. Is there any situation where it would be okay if it's under full wrap or cover? V'lo yochal shum kaluf o batzel kaluf o beitza kalufa she'avar aleim halayla. And I'm sure you've heard this from your mother or your grandmother also. Don't eat peeled garlic or peeled onion or peeled egg that was left out at night. It was left out overnight. And again, mipnei sheruach ra'a shora aleihem, because an evil spirit rests upon them. Afilu heim tsururim beveged b'chasumim, even if they're wrapped in cloth and sealed. V'imshir bahem ikaram v'hu hasa'ar shebarosh hashom v'habatzel. But if you leave over some of the root of the onion or the garlic, meaning like the tendrils that stick out from the head of the onion, oma'at kliposam, or even some of the skin of the onion or the garlic, then mutarim, then it's okay. Now, I don't know about you, but I go to Costco and I buy their chopped garlic in a container. It saves you a lot of hassle. And I've also noticed, by the way, that there are infestations in garlic cloves when I buy them in Toronto. I never found this before I moved here, but when I purchase fresh garlic here, if you look really carefully, sometimes I find these little bugs crawling through the garlic. So, yeah, what? Yeah. So I told my wife after I did this with several cloves of garlic over a period of time, I said, that's it. We're not buying fresh garlic anymore because there's too many bugs. So I told her, let's just get the pressed garlic, what they do, a minced garlic it's called, and it comes in water or oil sometimes, and you buy it from Costco or from the supermarket. You just keep it in the fridge and it's in a jar. Okay, so now what's my justification for doing that? What about the Ruach Ra? So we're going to have to see. Well, what about egg salad? Yeah, right? Okay, so let's take a look. We're going to have to see. Salt? Okay, let's see. V'chein lo yishta mashkin mezugin she'avar aleim halayla achar shenimzag b'mayim. He says, furthermore, you should not drink any diluted beverage. Usually it's an alcoholic beverage. Usually it's wine. As if it was left overnight after its dilution. V'hu shalanu b'chli matchis o kli neter. But that's provided that it was left in a metal container or netter. Let me just remind myself what netter is, because I've looked it up so many times.
It's a measuring tape.
Measuring tape? Carbon. It calls it carbonate, or I don't remember carbonate. Maybe made out of charcoal. or coal. If it's left in one of those containers, so then it's a problem. And that goes true for water itself that was left overnight in metal containers. So what's the reason for all of these things, and what are the limitations to this halacha? Okay, so first of all, let's start. So we'll take a look at the Imrei Yaakov lo yitain tapshil, or don't put food under your bed. Ve'im hakarka mirutzaf ba'avanim o ba'karashim yesh omrim de'ein lachush. He says, but what if the floor underneath your bed is paved with stones or beams of wood? If it's a hardwood floor, he says, some people say, or it's linoleum, some say there's nothing to worry about. De'ein ruach ra'a shora ela al garbe karka mamish. Because the evil spirit only rests on dirt floors. So already you're starting to see that there's some perhaps medical aspect to this as well. When you leave food on the floor, what happens? Okay, bugs or other bacteria, okay, right? There's, this 5-second rule maybe, but not 5-day rule, Yeah. Okay. And furthermore, if there's something dividing between the dirt floor and the food, it's elevated somewhat, that's also a mitigating circumstance. The hagam diyesh lahashik tzas, mikol makom l'snif chazi l'tztarufe va'ain l'kamen sifkat and lamed. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on in sifkat and lamed, but you certainly can use that as a mitigating factor to allow you to keep your food under your bed, provided that it's, you're upstairs and you're on hardwood floors or carpeted floors. That certainly obviates the problem. Okay. Oh. Okay, we'll see. Let's see. Osha'ar ochlim, or other foods. Mashma lichora da'af davar shehu chai yesh li zaher v'yesh matirim ba'ochel chai. So it sounds like any food, but some feel that if it's raw food, like a raw potato or something like that, then it's not a problem. So there's a difference of opinion regarding what kind of food. Okay. Okay. Next, tachas amita, underneath the bed. Yesh omrim she'ein chashash rak b'mita shabbat tashmish hamita. He says some say that there's only a problem if this is a bed where two people have sexual intimacy. Masha'ein kain im zeh l'shena bilvad afilu shel isha ein chashash. But if it's a single person and they're not sexually active on that bed, even if it's a single woman, there's nothing to worry about. There won't be any evil spirit underneath the bed. Evil spirits are only there if you're having fun. Okay. Uvamita shel ish kil yoter, and certainly you can be lenient if it's a single man. Okay. V'yesh omrim, so that's again another reason to be lenient. V'yesh omrim delo havi kapeda ela im yashan sham b'mita ha'u b'shah sha'amachal munach tachteha. Furthermore, some say that there's only a problem to leave the food there when you're actually sleeping on top of the bed. But if there's no one sleeping on the bed and you just want to leave it there during the day and pull it out at night, then that's not a problem either. Or let's say there's no one sleeping in that bed. It's a spare bedroom. That would also be a reason to allow you to leave food underneath the bed. And others argue, and they say that you have to be careful about this at all times, right? Not just in those limited circumstances. Umuva b'shem hagra shehu asar gam b'diavad sukar shahayamunach b'teva sheyashan aleha adam v'tziva lahashlicham lenahar. There's a story brought in the name of the Vilna Gaon that someone had left a sack of sugar underneath their bed where they had slept. And the Vilna Gaon had ordered that that sack of sugar should be thrown into the river. In other words, you must discard it, which is surprising. But apparently, the Vilna Gaon, maybe in his time in the 1800s, knew certain things that were dangerous. Ulam harbe achronim hiskimu de b'di'evid ein lesser b'chol gavni b'chein ikar, but that's not the that's not the consensus of the poskim. The consensus of the poskim is that b'di'evid, any food that's left under the bed is permissible, and so this is only lechatchila. But b'di'evid, you're allowed to permit food that was left under the bed. Okay, so this is all lechatchila. Okay, shom kaluf. You should not leave peeled garlic or peeled eggs or peeled onions. Those you cannot leave overnight. And so now we'll have to see if the b'di'evid applies to those things, right? So v'dafka imhu levado, aval imhu me'urav im sha'ar devarim let lanba. But that's only if the peeled garlic is by itself. Well, let's say you have peeled garlic that's mixed in with other things, right? Or peeled egg that's mixed in with mayonnaise. It's an egg salad. Or you have garlic that's been put into a ratatouille or something, whatever it is. He says there's no problem. V'yesh omrim d'chol ma shehisiru chazal mishum ruach ra'a kulam lo shchichi ha'idna kemo zugot v'chulei. He says, and some say, and this is generally what people follow today, is that all of the halachic concerns that Chazal had in the Gemara about ruach ra'ah, about evil spirits resting on food, no longer applies today whatsoever because of the argument that shadim were banished. And because shadim were banished, you no longer have to worry about evil spirits, demonic spirits resting on your food or tasting your food. And just like the Gemara in Psachim talks about the prohibition of zugot, doing things in couplets, drinking 2 cups of wine, for example, will bring a demon, right? We don't concern ourselves with those things anymore. Same thing, we're not worried about evil spirits resting on food. All right, maybe you have to be more concerned about shadim. I'd be more concerned about bears probably, but shadim and bears. Okay. Uv'shulchan aruch lohuva. One second, let me just finish. Uv'shulchan aruch lohuva klal inyan zeh. He says, and the Shulchan Aruch itself. This is the Rav Shulchan Aruch bringing this halacha. But the Shulchan Aruch itself doesn't bring this issue of food underneath the bed and so forth. Al kain after roy lachush, or the peeled garlic, and therefore, even though it's certainly worthwhile, whenever you have this situation, you should try to avoid it. But you should never raise a protest against those who are lenient. And so, if a person says, "Well, I take the position that this is all superstition." The Rambam, by the way, was not a big fan of these things. The Rambam certainly felt that this, the whole idea of shadim and of making amulets to ward off the evil spirits, this was all superstition. The Vilna Gaon railed against the Rambam. He felt that it was real, so you have different views. You have different views. You have the rationalists who say that, the whole idea of shadim is a superstition that goes to a bygone era, and there really there's no demons underneath your bed anymore, despite all of the horror movies, right, that Hollywood, may try to portray. But whenever you have an opportunity to avoid this kind of situation, he says, we recommend that you avoid it because who knows? Who really knows what the story is? Okay. Yeah.
So that's one thing that has to be.
That's true. We still hold that you have to wash your hands in a certain fashion to remove a ruach ra. That's true. But it seems that there's intrinsic ruach ra that rests on the human body versus a ruach ra that's deposited by demonic forces. And there's a difference between the two. The reason why your fingertips have a ruach ra is because you're somewhat dead when you're asleep. And so the remnant of tumah that rests on the body, as a result of partial death, is what you're trying to remove off of your fingertips. Yeah. Especially by the Sephardim, right? Ashkenazim do it also. Yeah. 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 Okay.